Well, thank you for that.
Start again.
I'll start again. Welcome to this meeting of the Planning and Development Council of the Town of Oakville. We have regrets from Councillor Knoll, and I'm looking for any declarations of pecuniary interest. And Madam Clerk, there are none. Would two of you like to move us into Committee of the Whole? Councillor Lischina and Councillor Palmer, thank you very much. If there's no objection, that's carried, and we're resolved in the Committee of the Whole. And we only need one person to move. We don't need a seconder for these items. We have two public confidential items and no confidential consent items. And I'm looking for a motion for the consent items. Councillor O'Meara, thank you. Any objection? Madam Clerk, seeing none, the consent items are adopted. And that brings us to our two public hearing items. Now, these are the first of two meetings for each of these topics, and they're related applications. They're next to each other. And the purpose of this meeting is to hear from the public as to any issues that the staff have not identified already in the report that has been provided to you, members of council, and the public. And it's sufficient just to name your issue if you don't see it there. And if you do see it there, it's sufficient to say, I'm glad you included my issue, and name it. But if we do it that way, then we have more time later in the meeting for decisions. With that, we're going to hear from our senior planner, Rob Thun, who's going to summarize the files that we've all read, and we hope the members of the public who look in on this and participate with us will also have had a chance to look at. And if anyone wants to participate in this item, they can do so by dialing 905-815-6095, and our clerks will connect you to the meeting at the appropriate time. And Mr. Thun, if you're ready, we're ready.
Thank you, Your Worship. If I can get my video up here. Here we go. Thank you. Tonight we have a zoning bylaw amendment application and draft plan and subdivision application submitted by Sherburne Lodge Limited for the development of approximately 24 hectares of land located on the southeast corner of Burnhamthorpe Road and Neagawa Boulevard. And it's municipally known as 382 Burnhamthorpe Road West. The report can be found as section 6.1 of tonight's agenda. And as you had mentioned, Your Worship, as with all statutory meetings, the purpose of tonight's presentation is threefold. One, to introduce it to council. Two, to introduce it to the public. And three, to obtain any further comments for review as related to this application. The call number is on the screen and is on every slide throughout my presentation. Slide. The slide before council identifies the location of the subject property. It is the white star on the air photo and its context with the surrounding area. As mentioned, the subject land is located on the southeast corner of Neagawa and Burnhamthorpe, or Neagawa Boulevard and Burnhamthorpe Road West. The subject lands and the abutting surrounding lands consist of vacant agricultural lands, and you'll see that to the west where the word Eno and Mattamy are. King's Christian Collegiate Academy is located right at the intersection, southwest corner of Neagawa and Burnhamthorpe Road. There's existing residential to the west of Neagawa Boulevard and also to the south. And there's also to the south, the existing natural heritage system, a portion of which is in town ownership already. The site itself is within the sub-watershed study of the East 16 Mile Creek, as identified by the North Oakville Creek's sub-watershed study. Staff are presently reviewing the associated environmental implementation / functional servicing report, more commonly known as the EIRFS. Just for some further context, because I know there were a couple emails that were submitted and should be part of council's package tonight. Just for that context, the green area to the south end of the property is Core 5. I've labeled it Core 5. That's the wooded area that is extends basically from Neogawa Boulevard all the way to 6th Line. It includes also the landfill site to the west of Neogawa Boulevard. As I've mentioned, the NHS has already been conveyed, or a portion thereof has been conveyed to the town through previous processes, and is part of that larger NHS system that's envisioned through the North Oakville East Secondary, North Oakville East Secondary Plan. We do have trails proposed through the NHS. Staff are working presently on a number of planning applications to the east of the subject site. Eno, as shown on this plan, is item 6.2 of tonight's agenda. Mattamy has previously gone, and there have been files related to Docasa, Timpson, Argo, Star Oak, all to the east of this site, all which contribute a portion to the natural heritage system. In addition to the NHS, west of Neogawa Boulevard and through the fullness of time, because this would be in the area of phase 3 for North Oakville, there is a linkage being proposed, or is captured in the secondary plan, I should say, between Core 4 and Core 5. Core 4, as shown on the aerial photo, is a wood lot. That linkage crosses Burnham Thorpe Road to the south, connects up with the landfill site and Core 5 proper. To complement the passive recreation abilities through the NHS, we do have North Park, which is approximately from the intersection of Settlers Road. It's approximately 1.5 kilometers south on Neogawa Boulevard, as shown on the air photo. Slide. With regard to the proposal before council tonight, it relates to 505 residential units consisting of 84 detached dwellings, 125 townhouse dwellings in either a on-street, double frontage, or back-to-back format. The double frontage are fronting onto Neogawa Boulevard. The back-to-backs are just south of block 106, the commercial block. And then you also have your street townhouses south of that. And also 296 apartment units, which is block 105 in the top right-hand corner of the draft plan. There is one natural heritage system block that's immediately to the bottom of the draft plan that will be added on to the town's existing inventory for the NHS. There is a village square that's proposed. And that was also envisioned by the North Oakville East Secondary Plan. There is a school block on the right-hand side that will contribute to the overall school site with Eno. So they are looking for 6 acres of land in that area. Also the road network. Settlers Road is Street Street A. It's an extension that goes right across the neighborhoods 9, 10, 11, which are east of 6th Line over to Neogawa, and continues on eastward through the lands west or east of 6th Line. Access to this site would be from Neogawa, from Burnham Thorpe Road, and the abutting easterly draft plans once those draft plans are developed. The applicant did host a virtual public meeting on September 8th, 2021. 2 members of the public showed up to that meeting. No concerns were raised that I was aware of through that process. As I had mentioned, council does have a package tonight of 2 comments that have been submitted as part of the notice of complete and the statutory public meeting notices. Property is part of the 2020 Regional Servicing Allocation Program. One matter, as always, that we're looking at is on-street parking. So the intent there is to maximize the number of parking spaces on-street as much as possible, and that will be continued to be reviewed. Also, just for a note of information to council and as part of the item 6.2 tonight, there is a neighborhood park that's envisioned for this neighborhood. It is actually where my word Eno is on the plan, and that is for that neighborhood, the neighborhood park. There is a neighborhood park further east to the site. Slide, please. From a secondary plan perspective, the lands are designated neighborhood area, natural heritage system area, and Neogawa Urban Core on Figure 2, NOE 2 of the North Oakville East Secondary Plan. That plan also, as you see on the slide here, does identify the village square, which I previously mentioned, and also the school. From the master plan perspective, which is Appendix 7.3 in the secondary plan and an excerpt as you see on the slide to the right, the land is identified as Natural Heritage System Area, General Urban, Suburban, those are 2 residential categories, Village Square, School, and the Neogawa Urban Core. The master plan does illustrate a concept. It was designed as part of the master plan or the secondary plan process, and it only reflects one option, as provided that the principles of secondary plan are being met, other options could be considered. In addition to the North Oakville East Secondary Plan, staff are presently taking a review of the Neogawa Urban Core with the intent of determining the appropriate boundaries for that Neogawa Urban Core, the mix of uses that are going to be included in the core, and also the scale of development. A public information meeting was held several weeks back. Staff are targeting the May Planning and Development meeting as a statutory public meeting on this town-initiated OPA process. Slide. From a zoning perspective, the subject lands are zoned ED. ED reflects the legally existing uses on the property as they were when the bylaw was passed. And just to note, with the approval of recent approval of bylaw 2022-07, the town zoning omnibus bill or bylaw for North Oakville, the lands are now zoned future development FD. So the ED has changed to FD. The application that proposed for the site requests site-specific zones and revised regulations, as you see on the slide, reflecting the Neogawa Urban Core, the General Urban, the Suburban, the Natural Heritage System Area, Institutional, Park, and Stormwater Management. That full zoning bylaw amendment can be found on Appendix A1 of the staff report. And we're continuing to work on the application and review the amendment. Slide, please. The slide before council tonight generally reflects a number of the matters identified in the staff report. It's not the full list, but their full list can be referenced in pages 15 to 17 of my staff report. And as mentioned, the review of the plan continues. So not all comments have been received, plus the additional comments from tonight's meeting will be added on to the matters to be addressed. But these are a highlight of some of the matters that have been captured in my report. The one thing though, it's critical, the review of the proposal reflects the finalization of the EIRFS, which provides the detailed direction to a number of the matters for the site, including but not limited to the finalization of the NHS limits, the stormwater management, the trail system, and grading and drainage. All those are critical to the design of the subdivision. Not only does this affect the subject property, but also those lands that are to be discussed as part of Agenda 6.2 tonight. And once again, all comments raised tonight by the public and by council will be addressed in the future recommendation report. Slide. So, your worship, in conclusion, staff are putting forth the following recommendation for council's consideration. Again, tonight, the comments received will form part of the record and will be addressed as part of the future recommendation report. Thank you, Mayor Burton.
Thank you, Mr. Thun. I appreciated the report, and I noted an extensive list of ongoing of issues and ongoing concerns that you're working on in the written report. And I'm looking for Councillor Palmer. Councillor Palmer, did you have any issues to add to the list here? And I'll go to there's your hand now. Councillor Palmer.
Thank you, Your Worship. I believe Councillor Sandu was before me, but you can't see her hand because of the flag. So
the yellow on yellow
I'll let her go
problem.
first. Yeah.
All right. Well, Councillor Sandu, My apologies for
Thank
my
you, Mayor
color
Burton. Maybe
blindness.
I'll switch out my my background for a little bit so it's a little bit easier to see. I appreciate it, Councilor Palmer. I think I'm probably going to end up mentioning something very similar to what Councilor Palmer would mention as well. I wanted to thank Mr. Thun for this excellent report, and thank you for mentioning the park and the parking. I think that's a continuing concern in Ward 7. My concern is actually something that I wanted to raise. It's a bit of a sidestep from just on-street parking. It's actually school parking specifically. We've had a number of requests, not only from the public, but also from the school board over the last few weeks about having enough parking on site at the school itself. I know that there's a little bit of push and pull when it comes from a planning perspective, but I wanted to raise that as an issue because we don't want to be in a situation where we're just issuing on-street parking permits for staff there on site because the school board hasn't requested additional parking. So I wanted to bring that to staff's attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sanju. Can I just ask you, the thing I thought we noticed at Udinawi is that the parking might have been designed for the school without portables, and when they put enough portables there to have, I don't know, I'm going to exaggerate, 10 or 12 schools worth of teachers and parents, then parking all of a sudden doesn't work. So should the town be looking to the school board to provide enough parking for what we know they will probably do on the portable side? In other words, maybe Mr. Thun, you can answer the question. Can we hold them to... If I could
interject quickly, and I'll let Mr. Thun obviously go into detail from a planning perspective. From what I understand operationally, Mayor Burton, you're exactly correct. I think also I would push the school board to remind themselves that there is going to be red line schools in the north of Oakville for a very, very long time. I think Udinawi's red line and a portables perspective is going to be for at least another decade. So I think that's just something for us to keep in mind and also for the school board to keep in mind.
Right, and since it's proven that the province never builds schools fast enough for the growth that they send us, Mr. Thun, can we require the board to provide enough parking for the maximum number of portables possible on a given site? Would that be something we could do?
Through your worship, to Councillor Sandu, the aspect of parking has been raised on other sites with regards to the main building and also portables. Portables theoretically are temporary structures, and the school boards have always said, because they're temporary structures, could there be relief? That is a matter that's being addressed right now through this application and the applications that I have ongoing. This concern is actually very timely in its submission as part of that review. Not only is it the school teacher aspect, your worship, but it's also the additional staff that are required for those classrooms. So you have a teacher, you have ECEs potentially, you have other staff that are in there also. So I've been led to believe through personal discussions that some classrooms could have 3 or 4, I'll call them teachers. So if we have those on a multitude of classrooms, then you're correct in saying that we do have a concern with regards to parking. So that will be reviewed as part of this application and any other application that I have before council as part of the recommendation report.
Thank you, Mr. Thun. That's all I have, Mr. Mayor Burton. Thank you.
Thank you, and that's super to hear. I hope I'm not being too hopeful when I say I hope we can hold the school board to the idea that their idea of temporary looks a heck of a lot like permanent to council. Councillor Palmer.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Mr. Thun, for your report and presentation. Your issues list did cover quite a bit of what I wanted to bring to your attention this evening. What remains is I have some questions about the double frontage townhomes. And more so, I'm not really clear on which streets would be laneways. I'm wondering, is Street E going to be a laneway? Do we know that at this point?
Just let me pull up the draft plan of subdivision.
Sure, and while you do that, I'll explain my concerns. So as you know, the double frontage townhomes exist at on Neagawa and 16 miles on Neagawa facing the community center. And you may remember many years ago that builder had promised the residents that they would have their driveways on Neagawa Boulevard. And of course, that being a regional road, there was no driveways permitted there. So they're left with a laneway where, they can't park and they have no driveway. So I'm wondering if these units will have driveways, and I'm wondering if there will be street parking there. I bring this up because I think it's, I've just accepted that people are not using their garages for parking their vehicles. These days, they are using it for storage. So I'm not really counting that as a parking space. So I was curious to know if there will be on-street parking available for those double frontage townhomes who front onto Neagawa Boulevard and will not have a driveway.
Through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Parmar, Street E is actually a full street. It is not a lane. It will be 17 meters wide, or it's being proposed at 17 meters wide, similar to streets D, F, G, and E, C. The driveways will be off of Street E. The units will front onto Neagawa Boulevard, but the garages will be in the back. So it is not a lane, it is a public street. So there's a difference between the 7.5 meter lane and the 17 meter road.
Thank you, really glad to hear that. And then I guess, just into parking considerations, just because we see an apartment building coming in, of course, we're interested in knowing how many stories. I don't think that was covered in the report. And we know that when we get into these more intensified areas, and especially with apartment buildings, that sometimes the spill of visitor parking falls into the surrounding community. I didn't see any visitor parking spots. Like some developers will actually have visitor lots at the end of each street. And I'm wondering if that could be taken into consideration as well.
Through Your Worship, to Councillor Parmar, the apartment building that is located in Block 105 can go up to 8 stories. It is being considered as part of the Neagawa urban core area. So up to 8 stories. As mentioned in the concerns raised or the issues raised so far to date, access to those blocks will need to be reviewed. Burnham Thorpe Road, as it's shown on the slide, is actually William Halton Parkway. It's a regional road. So we know that the region, similar to other major arterial roads, does not allow for driveways to come onto Burnham Thorpe Road or William Halton Parkway. So the access to the blocks would be coming from the town's local streets. We, as part of this process, can get further information on how that block would be developed. You'll note in one of my concerns is the width of Street C. It's 17 meters right now, but this block, along with the commercial block, along with what you'll see in item 6.2, does raise a bit of a concern to staff, because there's a potential for, I believe, and I stand to be corrected, upwards of 1,000 units.
Yeah.
So we're looking at the functionality of that corridor and the size of the street. So that is a matter that will have to be addressed.
Okay, great. Okay, and then my next question, just around the apartment buildings, and I've said this before as well, is that, I would really like for whatever we can do to engage with these developers so that they put the apartments in first. There's some approved developments in Ward 7 that, have been sitting for 5-6 years with no development on them. And it's a real shocker to residents when they've been living somewhere for 6 years and all of a sudden there's, a 12-story building going in. And, as much as we encourage everybody to review the plans in the area, I think that we should continue our efforts on our end as well in working with the developer to see what we can do to work with them so that they can bring the apartments in first and foremost before the rest of the housing mix.
Through your worship, Councilor Parmar, I will take that as a direction to continue on with those discussions.
Thank you. And then I also wanted to know if we know where this school, which I believe is number 5, is on the capital priorities list, and confirming if it is a Catholic school.
Through your worship to Councillor Palmer, it is a Catholic school. I'm in the midst of trying to find out where that is in their capital program. I believe it's not short term. I believe it's a little more medium term. So potentially around the 2029, 2030 timeframe. I know that the kids in this area would be going to St. Gregory's and Loyola, south of Dundas. So right now, there is no time frame. I did look on the Capital Board's site or the Catholic Board's site, and it didn't appear that there was any funding so far from the province. But I will follow up with the school board. I do have an email in there with them on this very matter and get back to you.
Okay, great. And then my last comment is just on taking affordable housing into consideration and for the apartment buildings, especially to ensure that there is a mix of units there too, ranging from, you know, not just the studios, but also 2-bedroom and 3 bedrooms for families that are in need of affordable housing.
We'll take that as a direction. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. And thank you, Mr. Thun. Councillor Elgar.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Burton. Thanks, Rob, for the presentation tonight. My concern is also about schools, but a little bit different, because I see we've got 2.155 hectares for the schoolyard, which is great. We also had something similar to that in Saw-Wet over where they're building there, and they have approval for 1,181 units in the beginning, and of course it's gone up from there. But in that agreement with the school, there was also in there that if the school board did not purchase the land within 7 years, then the developer had an as-of right to develop and build houses on that property. And in fact, that's exactly what is going to happen. There is absolutely $0 in the 10-year forecast. It's already been decided the children will be bused outside of this island subdivision, and there'll never be a school because the land will be gone. And council accepted that, staff accepted it. And this is what happens when things like that are putting into agreements. And going forward, I would hope that we don't agree to any of these things with, well, if you don't buy the land in 7 years, we have an as-of right to plant houses. So I don't know how we can get that going, but I'm pretty disappointed of what happened in Saw-Wet. And you watch it. Never a school there, over 1,200 people. And they don't have to come to council to get approval. It's already been done. I thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Elgar. Just so on your comment about the 2.155 hectares, that is a portion on this draft plan. There is a portion on the abutting easterly subdivision that will be added onto it. So it will be 2.43 at the end of the day, which is 6 acres, which is typically what the school boards look for.
Yeah, another 0.7 of an acre, 5.35 to 5.325 right now on this one. I realize that.
Yes.
So, Rob, what can we do to make sure this doesn't happen again going forward?
I will look into that. I have not been made aware of that. So thank you very much for that comment. And I'll write it down and follow up with the school boards on that.
Yeah, I have already, and that's the answer I was given. They will be bused to Heritage Glen, those children. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Elgar. Councillor Chisholm.
Thank you, Worship, through you to Rob. Just a quick question about the school, and now it's 2.155 hectares. Is in that design of that subdivision, is any of our town parks adjacent or abutting that school property?
Through your councillor, or to the councillor, the school board block 107 is right beside the neighborhood park that is envisioned for that area. So when item 6.2 gets reviewed tonight, you'll notice that the school board site is abutting the, I'll call it the west area of or west limit of the park. One of the concerns that I did raise in the staff report was the location of units 60 to 67 and 79 to 84, and the relocation so that the school site would front onto Street A and Street B, with those potential lots moving up to Street C. So there's a continuity when you're driving down Street A of seeing a school and a park together.
And I guess just for our flags to raise on this one is that the schools have been noted for many years of abutting to town property and using our parks in a very intensive way for their program, and they use that for the program and also for parking. Do we have any as issues related an agreement with the school board, whether it's the Halton District School Board or the Roman Catholic District School Board, with respect to how the usage of that park in relation to the school activities and program and the parking issues?
Through Mayor Burton to the councillor, it's my understanding that we do have reciprocal agreements with both school boards for the synergies between the park and the school. Not only will the school have the actual building and the portables, but there'll also be the parking, there'll also be the playing fields on the school site proper, and they do have the ability to use the neighborhood park if need be through that reciprocal agreement. So I can follow up with the park staff to get further information on that for the recommendation report.
That would be advantageous, knowing that the reciprocal agreement is a universal agreement. However, when you get into those relationships of park and access and so forth and usage, it goes to a different level, Robert. So I just want to make sure when this comes, if there is a separate agreement, how that's going to work, because in past we've had a lot of challenges with respect to the usage and also parking when we have adjacent parkland associated to school sites. I'll just leave it as that.
Yeah. Just one comment on the aspect of parking for the neighborhood park. There is no parking that is proposed for our neighborhood park. It's all on-street parking to deal with the on-street parking, because we will have a large frontage. So there will be no parking in the neighborhood park. But as we mentioned previously, there are issues with the elementary school or all the schools so far. So that matter will be addressed as part of the forthcoming recommendation report.
Thank you, Councillor Chisholm. Councillor Sandhu.
Thank you, Mayor Burton. It's actually not a question, just a quick notification that Councillors Lichina and Adams have had their power go out in Northeast Oakville, so they're not available for the meeting right now.
Oh.
Thank you very much. You beat me to it. They sent a message, and so they're regretful.
Wanted to make sure you got it. Thank you.
They're regretful that they can't participate for the moment. We'll see how fast their power gets restored. Who would like to, I'm going to turn to the Director Charles and see if he's identified any issues to be added to the list.
Thank you, Mayor Burton. The other items that I had identified based on the conversation with council is work with the school boards on the school parking issues and opportunities to increase that parking supply. Work with the applicant to accelerate timing of the construction of the apartment block. Consider options to have family-sized units in the apartment block as well as affordable units. And provide some additional information to council regarding the reciprocal agreement between the town and the school board for the purpose of park use, parking, and other facilities.
Great. I'd like to add a note. In the report, I noted that there was discussion of whether the development would be transit supportive. And as we did the region's official plan update over the last few years, we became acquainted with a provincial ladder, if you will, of density, of how good or how frequent a transit system you can support with a given level of density. And this report mentions sort of the bottom rung of transit supportiveness, I would say. And this is up near one of our urban core, one of our prospective urban core areas. So I'm anxious that we're supporting transit a little better than what it sounded like. So could we look to how to make sure that transit's viable? We've gone to a lot of trouble to build a transit system that's perhaps double what other cities our size might have. And it'd be nice to support that investment that council's made. All right, I'm looking for a motion now to receive the information. Councillor Sandu, thank you. Is there any objection? Madam Clerk, there being none, the motion carries, and that brings us to 6.2.
Thank you.
And 6.2 will allow us to hear from Kelly Livingston, and who's the planner on this one. And you got a little taste of an introduction to it in the last one, because this basically is the next property over. This is the eastern neighbor of what we just went through. And I noted in reading the report that the issues list is very similar. So, Mr. Livingston, if you're ready, we are. And over to you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Mayor Burton. Good evening, members of council. So as heavily referenced in the previous item, this is the statutory public meeting relating to a draft plan of subdivision, official plan amendment, and zoning bylaw amendment for the addresses municipally known as 210 and 374 Burnham Thorpe Road West. As noted at the start, the purpose of tonight's meeting is to obtain input from the public as well as council related to the application, and no recommendation is being proposed tonight. For any members of the public watching, there is a number to call in at the bottom of each of my slides if you wish to provide comment at the end. Next slide, please. So the subject lands are shown on the air photo on the slide. They're generally on the south side of Burnham Thorpe Road West, along Carding Mill Trail, generally between 6th Line and Neagawa Boulevard. Just east of the subject lands is the proposed Tokasa Group subdivision, which had its public meeting in September 2021, and that one's still under review. And immediately to the west, of course, is the Sherburne Lodge plan of subdivision that you're all familiar with now. And to the south is the Mattamy Phase 4 plan of subdivision. Next slide, please. So a colored version of the draft plan of subdivision is shown on the slide, with areas for each land use provided in the legend on the right. Overall, the proposal includes the following. It's approximately 292 single detached dwellings, 309 townhouse dwellings in total, which include 214 street townhouses, 75 lane-based townhouses, and 20 live-work lane-based townhouses. You can see those in the purple on the slide. Furthermore, there's 2 mixed-use apartment and townhouse blocks. Those are in the darker red. There is a future development block, which would develop in a similar way to the apartment blocks. There is a neighborhood park, which was referenced in the previous presentation. It's about 4.3 hectares in size, immediately adjacent to the school block, which is in purple, and that's the small sliver on the west side, completing the school block to the west. And there's also a stormwater management pond in blue and natural heritage system blocks as well, all relating to the EIRFS that Rob was speaking to in the previous presentation. As mentioned in the previous one, and the same is true here, on-street parking will be maximized on site. The applicant did submit a on-street parking plan, which will be further refined as driveway locations are sorted out. And just a quick note before moving on, the development block at the top right of the draft plan is labeled as such because the block relies on the location of both William Halton Parkway and Burnham Thorpe Road West. Burnham Thorpe Road currently travels the entire north boundary of the site. But of course, as William Halton Parkway, the extension is constructed, the alignment of Burnham Thorpe will be adjusted slightly to kind of create the northern limits of that future development block. I checked earlier today, and the construction of this section of William Halton Parkway, it was expected to start last month to be completed in December 2023. Next slide, please. This is just a, well, it shows the latest draft plan of subdivision for each, well, the current one, the Remington Eno subdivision, but also the Docasa to the east and the Sherburne Lodge to the west. Hopefully this slide gives a little bit of overview as to how the subdivisions will coordinate with one another. But of course, that will be considered as these are further developed. Next slide. Just speaking to the planning policy quickly, the subject lands are designated neighborhood area and natural heritage system in the North Oakville East Secondary Plan. There are also symbols depicting an elementary school site and a neighborhood park, as are shown on the subdivision. Additionally, you can see the Neagawa urban core area to the west in a lighter hatched gray, which, well, Rob spoke to it, but I'll also speak to it in this presentation. Next slide, please. Here's the North Oakville master plan, and it illustrates a conceptual design as well as land use categories for the North Oakville East planning area. The subject lands in the master plan are identified as a range of land uses, and these include suburban area, general urban area, neighborhood center, elementary school, neighborhood park, stormwater management facility, and natural heritage system area. Next slide. So this is the applicant's proposed zoning change. The full requested zoning bylaw amendment is provided as an appendix to the staff report. And this is requested to rezone the lands in the 2009-189 zoning bylaw from existing development to uses that will implement the proposed plan of subdivision. And these include Neagawa urban core, neighborhood center, general urban, suburban, institutional, park, stormwater management facility, and natural heritage system. And these will have special provisions and holding provisions as required. And next slide. So this one also has an official plan amendment, and this official plan amendment is requested to designate the lands shown on the slide, on the left part of the slide, at the north end of the development from neighborhood area to Neagawa urban core area. These lands that are shown, these are the lands that are shown in the draft plan as the apartment mixed use and the development block. And the applicant is also requesting a new policy, an exception is shown as item number 2 on the slide. And this is requesting permitting apartment buildings up to 12 stories and densities of 4.5 FSI in the apartment mixed use blocks in the north end of the site. And just for a bit of context, the Neagawa urban core review in late 2021 was brought to council to allow staff to perform consultation. There was a public information meeting, as Rob spoke to a few weeks back. This proposed official plan amendment would be evaluated for consistency and acceptability with the direction of the Neagawa urban core area, understanding that the boundary with what the applicant is proposing would require an adjustment slightly to the study area. But this work will be completed at the same time and in coordination with that core area review. And next slide, please. Just the last component to the official plan amendment is a request to move the activity node shown in the master plan from the intersection highlighted in magenta to the kind of square in black to the northern intersection of Carding Mill and Street B, I believe, or Street C rather, in the plan of subdivision. The intent for this activity node is to serve the neighborhood within a 5-minute walk by providing a mix of uses, transit stop, and other uses serving the community. I've included this relocation of the activity node as an issue and whether or not that is acceptable as an issue under review in the staff report. And next slide. So this is a compressed summary of the matters to be considered as provided in my staff report. But the full matters are provided in the staff report, so you can, of course, refer to those. I won't read them all, but these are what staff have identified to date. As Rob mentioned in the previous meeting, I'll point it out as well, but it's critical. What is critical to the review of the proposal is the finalization of this EIRFS, which would provide the detailed direction to a number of matters, including the final limits of the NHS, stormwater management, pond, trails, grading, and drainage as well. And next slide. Therefore, given all this, staff put forward the following recommendation as shown for council's consideration. Any comments as received will be addressed in a future recommendation report. I'm available for questions as council may have, and I'll also note the applicant's planner is here should any be directed to them. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Livingston. Councilor Sandu.
Thank you, Mayor Burton. I just have kind of like more of a general comment with a question at the end. So I appreciate staff basically capturing the majority of my comments for this report. And I wanted to make the comment that sometimes what makes for really good planning isn't always what's best for our community. So we're supposed to be transit friendly per your comment, Mayor Burton, but we don't have enough transit. We're supposed to be walkable, but then we don't have our sideways cleared during the winter. And then with that being said, really, could staff speak a little bit more about how we're going to be able to confirm the parking and the potential lay-by parking around the live work areas there on Carding Mill? I'm concerned because we see a constant kind of push and pull with live works around the ward and not having enough parking for patrons of those units because residents, quite frankly, or teachers are taking those spots.
Through you, Mayor Burton, to the councillor, the parking, as mentioned, there is an on-street parking study that was provided with the application rather. That'll be fully reviewed, and the location of the live works and the streetscape and how their parking could accommodate those live work units will be evaluated in the future recommendation and reviewed with staff as we move forward.
Thank you for that, Mr. Livingstone. I think if we're going to add another issue to the issues list, I would challenge staff to go back and ask some additional questions about how that use exactly is going to look. And I don't think, particularly in Ward 7, that the usage option really works. And what I mean by that is folks, coming in actually using the space during the day with the evenings free for residents to park. We're in a COVID type of world. People are working from home. That usage on time and off time isn't really working anymore. So I'll challenge staff with an additional piece to kind of take away. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Palmer.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you for the presentation. I had a question of clarification for the amendment on the apartment building height. And I'm trying to understand, because the previous application that we just saw, we were told that maximum is 8 stories. So does that mean if this amendment is accepted, that applicant will also have the opportunity to build up to, what did you say? I think it was 15 or 12 stories?
Through you, Mayor Burton, that's correct on the 12 stories. The amendment they're requesting is to vary the permitted height from 8 stories to 12. 8 stories is what is currently permitted under the Neagawa Urban Core Zone in the North Oakville East Secondary Plan.
Okay. Yeah, a lot of my issues have been covered under the list. Just one question when it comes to parking. I'm not sure who can answer this. I mean, the town is conducting a parking study right now, and there was a survey that went out to several stakeholders. And I'm wondering, when will that study be finalized, and will we have enough time to incorporate those findings from that study into these plans to make sure that we're doing the best we can to provide adequate parking in our new subdivisions?
That might be a question for the director. At any rate, he's
I thought
volunteering to field it.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you. The parking study is currently underway. We need to go back and take a look as to the timing that we would be bringing something back to council. Given our schedule right now, it might be tough to bring something back to council before June. That said, if we are coming back towards the latter part of this year, we would then be looking at what recommendations are coming out of that parking study, and therefore, do we need to make further changes to our zoning bylaw regulations? So that would probably be well into next year. Further, I don't believe that either of these two applications are going to be, just given the matters that are outstanding, are going to be brought forward back to this council before June of this year in any event.
Thank you.
All right then. Councillor Haslett-Deal, your yellow hand is on your yellow background, but I saw it.
Thank you, Mayor Burton. Further to Councillor Palmer's comments on the prior application, are the apartments, for clarity, are the apartments a phase 2 or phase 1 of the proposed application?
Through you, Mayor Burton, as the applicant has proposed it, they would be considered as phase two. But I had heard the comments from the previous application. And I would certainly take it as a matter to bring up for further review is the phasing and future construction of these.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Grant, welcome back. I note that your power interruption was much briefer than the Ward 6 power interruption, because they're still not back. Just unmute yourself.
Which is actually the only reason I raised my hand. I just want to make sure that everybody knew that we had a quick power outage here, which seems to be lasting longer in the Ward 6 area. So yeah, I want people to know that they are very involved and yet somehow are not back to confirm with the conversation going on right now.
Thank you very much, sir. Who among us would like to move receipt? I'll check with the director to see if he added anything. Councillor Adams, welcome back. We were just talking about your power outage. Mr. Charles.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The additional items that I heard council discuss is to work with the applicant on the live work option and its operations and determine if that is in fact the best land use option in this area, as well as from the tenor of the discussion to work with the applicant to accelerate the timing of the construction of the apartment block, as well as consider options to have family size units in the apartment block, as well as look at the affordability of some of those units as well.
Super. Would you also add the transit supportive question I tacked on from last time? Thank you. Who wants to move receipt? Councillor Palmer, thank you very much. If there's no objection, that's carried. Madam Clerk, there's no objection, and so that is carried. Now, that brings us to 6.3, which is the public meeting and recommendation report for the town-initiated official plan amendments 42 and 324, and the delegation of powers bylaw. And this is to bring the town closer in conformity with the Bill 13 Act of the Legislature entitled Supporting People and Businesses Act. We have a presentation from our very own Director of Planning Services, Gabe Charles.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. So this public meeting and recommendation report is with respect to two official plan amendments that we are bringing forward for council's consideration, as well as an additional item that would be added to the town's delegation bylaw. Similarly, with the previous items, if there are those who wish to speak to this item, the number is 9058-156095. So I do apologize that this is a rather text-heavy presentation. It's hard to add graphics and flash to legislative discussions, but let's see what we can do. So as council may be aware, Bill 13 was approved by the province, received royal assent in December of 21. And what it did was look to provide some additional delegation opportunities to council to delegate matters that they consider minor in nature to staff or to a committee of council. And that would be items related to removing holding provisions, could be with respect to temporary use bylaws, as well as other minor zoning amendments such as housekeeping. So in the context of housekeeping, what that would mean would be those items when staff bring back to council, items that require additional clarification, if there are clerical matters that need to be fixed in our bylaws, et cetera, that would be the context of a housekeeping bylaw. But in order to do this, what we need to have are those enabling policies within our official plan. And because we're governed by the two official plans, Local Oakville plan, as well as our 84 plan for the northeast area of the town, we have two amendments that it brings forward. So should council choose to delegate this authority, what it does not do is it doesn't change any of the notice requirements that the town uses or the statutory requirements. It does not limit our appeal rights. It does not change any of the requirements as it relates to provincial planning policy and conformity that is required to provincial plans, regional and local plans. It does allow council to include conditions such as delegation or to the delegation, as well as be able to withdraw that delegation authority at any time, again, through an amending bylaw. The intent of the changes to the Act were to in the province's release to provide opportunities to streamline the planning processes, as well as shift that administrative burden away from council and to staff, allows council to continue to focus on the bigger picture policy and visioning issues, as well as potentially to reduce delays in the approvals due to reporting cycles. So there may be some benefits to the opportunity to delegate some of these items, including increasing the speed at which we are dealing with approvals, which could bring development online a little bit sooner. There's, as I said, less administrative work for town council with these types of delegations, potential cost savings to the applicants, and does provide us with a little bit more flexibility in terms of that approvals process. So as I said, there are two official plan amendments that we're looking at. The two that you'll find are as Appendix A and B to the staff report. The first one would be OPA 42, would be to the Livable Oakville plan, and that would be adding policies to Section 28 of the plan, as well as with the 1984 plan, add a section into Part F of that plan to provide that enabling. And again, the policies are just focused on the three items that are listed: to remove holding symbols, authorize temporary use of land, as well as pass housekeeping bylaws. So the other piece that goes with this is the delegation bylaw itself, which council had dealt with back in September of last year through 2177. The changes to that are provided in Appendix C to the report. And again, it just reflects the exact same items that are listed on the previous slide. It does offer the delegation of approval, in this case, to the Commissioner of Community Development, as well as noting that the amendments to the delegation of powers bylaw would only come into force after the appeal period is passed for the two OPAs, 42 and 324. So in terms of the process that we're looking at, what we wanted to ensure is that there is no change in terms of how we're providing notice to the public, so that will be continued. We will also, with the lifting of the holding provisions, make sure that those are on our website, but also provide notice to the ward councillors themselves so that the councillors are aware that these applications have been filed with the town. And what it does in terms of the process is it just skips the part of staff reporting back to council directly. But that wouldn't be an arbitrary decision made by the commissioner. We would be providing that notice of decision to the ward councillors, no different than the way we do that with our site plan approvals currently. We notify the ward councillors that an impending approval, or in some cases refusal, is in order, and then staff would provide that recommendation to the commissioner for that delegated approval. With temporary use bylaws and housekeeping, the upfront part of the process would continue the same, which is a presentation by staff through a statutory public meeting to council on these types of items. And what it would mean is that towards the back end of the process, rather again than providing a staff report to council, staff would be looking to provide that recommendation to the commissioner for that final decision. But again, before that decision has been made, staff would make the ward councillors aware of an impending decision. That is the essence of it in a nutshell, and the recommendation is before you on this slide. And if there are any questions, I would be happy to answer those.
Thank you, Mr. Charles. Let's see who has questions. Councillor O'Meara has a question.
Thank you, Your Worship. And yeah, it's just a point of clarification with regards to council's role in this. Let's just say, for example, ward councillors had an issue with staff's decision to grant a temporary use of a building or something like that. Does council still have the ability to bring that forward to council to have a discussion, or how does that process work?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it would be very similar to how we handle site plans right now, where if council has a vested interest and they would like to make that decision, they can always make that request of staff, and staff would present it to council for that final decision.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor O'Meara. Would you like to provide us with the motion? Thank you very much. Council, is there any objection? Thank you very much. There being no objection, that's carried. Thank you, Mr. Charles. Council, that brings us to 7.1, the recommendation report for the zoning bylaw amendment at Amico Properties at 152 Wilson Street. And I'd call your attention to the correspondence we received today from the West River Residents Association on this matter, and joining us to consult the neighborhood more on items like this. With that, we can turn our attention to Paul Barrett, the senior planner, and he will present the recommendation report.
Thank you, Your Worship and members of council. This presentation will provide an overview of the recommendation report regarding the zoning bylaw amendment application at 152 Wilson Street. Next slide, please. The subject lands are located in Kerr Village, north of Rebecca Street, between Kerr Street and Wilson Street. Next slide, please. The proposed development consists of a 6-story retirement home with 230 suites, which would provide a continuum of care. If I could direct your attention to the top left image, it illustrates that the first floor is proposed to be mostly dedicated to resident amenity space, including dining, spa, fitness, greenhouse, lounge, games, and library space. In addition, an approximately 330 square meter restaurant use is proposed at grade along Kerr Street with an accessory outdoor patio and direct access from Kerr Street. The patio and streetscape treatment is conceptually illustrated in the top right image. The bottom left image shows a rendering of the proposed building from the corner of Rebecca and Wilson Street. And I would like to point out that the proposed building setback of the main wall is approximately 19 meters to Wilson Street. That's generally reflective of the existing building setback. The loading and garbage areas are proposed to be enclosed within the portion of the building that is located approximately 3.8 meters to Wilson Street, which is circled in blue on the bottom left image. The last image in the bottom right illustrates the stepping of the proposed building at the 4th, 5th, and 6th story along Kerr Street, and the 3rd, 4th, and 5th story along Wilson Street, which I will explain more later in terms of appropriateness of transitions. Next slide, please. Since the statutory public meeting on September 8th of 2020, revisions to the original building design include a new restaurant and outdoor patio at grade along Kerr Street, together with at-grade building entrance, and that's illustrated in the image on the right. Lowering the finished floor elevation along Kerr Street and elimination of the associated retaining walls. Additional stepping of the building at the 4th story along Wilson Street and 6th story along Kerr Street. Refinement of the building design to break up building massing, including simplified balconies, adding articulation, and 4-story elements along Kerr Street, combined with covered canopies for the appearance of smaller storefronts. And lastly, streetscape improvements along Kerr Street. Supporting studies were also updated, which I'll touch on later in terms of how council and public comments have been addressed. Next slide, please. The subject lands are located within Kerr Village and designated Main Street 1 bonusing, which permits buildings between 2 to 4 stories in height, 6 stories with bonusing. The Kerr Village urban design schedule shown on the image in the right provides that the subject lands are located along a primary street, that's Kerr Street, with an enhanced streetscape area, and a secondary street, that's Rebecca Street, and they're located on the edge of a growth area. That's particularly important to consider in terms of appropriate transitions to the neighborhood on the east side of Wilson Street. In staff's opinion, as revised, the proposal conforms to Livable Oakville. Livable Oakville permits the retirement home land use and the ground floor commercial use, that is the restaurant, along Kerr Street. Together with the proposed building height of 6 stories with bonusing as provided in the bylaw, the site layout conforms to Livable Oakville by providing limited surface parking at the rear of the building and access to loading and servicing areas from a local street. which supports transit supportive policy goals and objectives. Given the surrounding context, and as explained in the urban design section of the associated staff report, the design of the proposed building provides appropriate setback and step backs to transition to Wilson Street. Similarly, the proposed building design along Kerr Street provides a high degree of transparency on the ground floor, building entrances facing the street, and it now contains commercial space together with the outdoor patio to foster an active Main Street environment. Together, the proposed land use, building height, massing, site layout, and building design are consistent with the Kerr Village policies and assist in achieving broader policy objectives of revitalizing Kerr Village, optimizing use of infrastructure and public service facilities, and transit supportive development. Next slide, please. The proposed zoning bylaw amendment would rezone the property to a MU1 zone with a special provision for 11. The amendment would require the commercial use, that is the restaurant, along at least 65% of the Kerr Street frontage, and includes site-specific zoning standards requiring proposed building stepbacks and a minimum rear yard of 17 meters along Wilson Street, with provisions to accommodate the loading and garbage area projection. The amendment would also permit up to 6 stories in height, dependent on registration on title of an agreement pursuant to Section 37 of the Planning Act, so that's bonusing, to the satisfaction of the town. Next slide, please. In terms of resolution of issues, I'll briefly touch on a few of the issues covered in the staff report. However, the full list of issues and more detailed analysis is included in the staff report. In terms of appropriate transitions to the low-rise residential neighborhood on the east side of Wilson Street, staff reviewed the proposed design against Section 6 of Livable Oakville, which sets out goals, objectives, and policies for urban design, and also the Livable by Design manual. On the top left image, I included an image from the design part B, that's the urban design direction for Kerr Village, which depicts a desirable built form and pedestrian realm components that reinforce traditional Main Street development by addressing the street and also transitioning to surroundings. In this case, the subject lands are separated from the low-rise residential area by Wilson Street. The main wall of the proposal would be set back an additional approximately 19 meters from Wilson Street, and the building design includes step backs at the 4th and 5th stories. The dashed line illustrates the 45-degree angular plane from Wilson Street. Together, the building setback and step back result in a design that exceeds the 45-degree angular plane to the low-rise residential area, which in staff's opinion is consistent with the design direction for Kerr Village. An urban design appendix was also included as Appendix B to the staff report for Council's consideration. It would require specific matters, which are more appropriately addressed through site plan, to be advanced through a future site plan application, which would refine the massing of the building further. Next slide, please. From an urban design perspective, this lot is a priority lot as it's visible from the public realm in every direction, from the park to the north, Kerr Street, Rebecca Street, and Wilson Street. As noted in the staff report, staff are satisfied with the changes made to the building design regarding breaking up of the building massing, addition of step backs, and refining the form of the building. As previously noted, the urban design appendix is included as Appendix B of the staff report to advance these urban design matters further through the required site plan application. In terms of appropriate land use at grade, the design treatment along primary and secondary streets, as shown in the top left image, includes a restaurant land use with a patio that is now proposed at grade along Kerr Street, and streetscape matters will be further advanced through the required site plan application. For transportation, the updated transportation impact assessment provides that the proposed development would result in 28 net new trips in the AM peak hour and 48 net new trips in the PM peak hour. when considered in the context of existing infrastructure, this increase in trips was found to have minimal impact on the study area roadways. No new critical movements would be created as a result of site traffic, and increases to delays were considered minimal. For parking, 110 parking spaces are proposed, which works out to about 0.47 parking spaces per suite. While this would exceed the town's parking standard of 0.33 parking spaces per suite in the town's zoning bylaw, staff reviewed the applicant's parking study and proxy sites, which provided a similar continuum of care, and found that the on-street parking proposed would be adequate. Parking matters would be further addressed through the required site plan application, which would include matters such as dedicated visitor parking spaces and signage, parking layout, and enhanced landscaping between the surface parking area and Wilson Street. Next slide, please. All written public comments received as of the date of the staff report were included in Appendix A. While the staff report addressed many of these issues through the analysis of planning policy and issues covered by the staff review and council resolutions, the staff report also provides an analysis of the remaining issues, including garbage storage, site plan approval, on-street parking along Wilson Street, and construction impacts. In terms of garbage storage, as I noted before, it is proposed to be stored within the building adjacent to Wilson Street. The garbage storage area would be located within the building, which would limit odor and visual impacts, and the door would face Rebecca Street. Furthermore, the vehicle circulation plan has been designed to provide for a continuous forward motion, and that would minimize the backup noise from trucks. Finally, to address concerns regarding noise from garbage pickup, staff are also recommending as part of Appendix B that as part of a future site plan agreement, private pickup of garbage would be limited to weekdays between 9 a.m. and 4 p.m. The owner is in agreement with this provision, and it would run with the title of the property. Next slide, please. In conclusion, Your Worship, staff put forth the following recommendation as shown for council's consideration. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Barrett, for your usual thorough job. Council, do you have questions? Councillor Chisholm.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Paul, for the report, the detailed, comprehensive report. The only question I have and concerns to some of the residents with respect to, again, the garbage storage area. In the initial plans, from the initial plans until the final plan here, has there been any changes or movement on that garbage that garbage storage area? Was there different setbacks on it? And number two, what other considerations do we have with respect to the relocating the garbage storage in other parts of the building, and what kind of concerns or issues we had with that kind of discussion?
Through you, Your Worship, the garbage location and configuration, it has not changed since the statutory public meeting. So since this application was first presented to council, what staff have done in that intervening time is reviewed the site layout. We've also investigated alternative access points to this site. That would be along Rebecca Street. And we've also worked with the owner in terms of limiting the garbage pickup times, as I mentioned, during the week, during business hours, essentially. So that constituted really the staff review of the garbage pickup, and we also reviewed it against the urban design standards. And what the applicant's proposing through this application, keeping the garbage indoors, it limits the odor. The doors for the loading area, it faces Rebecca Street, not the neighborhood to the east. And having a site circulation plan, which includes a continuous forward motion, it would limit disturbance to the surrounding area.
Now, last question, Paul, with respect to the site plan, the consideration of the site plan with plant materials, the trees and so forth, is the intent to have I would say, a very good barrier between the residents on Wilson and that storage area?
Through your worship, the zoning bylaw amendment in front of council would maintain the minimum required landscape strip along the surface parking area and Wilson Street. And the intent is to provide that enhanced landscape treatment within that area. And that's also outlined in the applicant's urban design brief.
And my last question with respect to street parking, it's always been a concern, and I understand for the residents, and I understand their concerns with overflow parking happening on the side streets. And how are we going to mitigate that with respect to the parking? Hopefully the parking on site will be adequate, but what are we doing with respect to the side streets and parking?
Through your worship to Councillor Chisholm, staff reviewed the parking justification report. So that dealt with the adequacy of on-site parking. So through the future site plan application, the direction would be to include visitor parking spaces, which are very accessible to the public. So likely the surface parking area adjacent to Wilson Street includes signage to direct visitors to park on site, not along the street. And also review the parking layout and configuration as well through the site plan application.
So as we move forward and with the assumption that this facility is being built and we do have issues on side street parking, I would assume that our enforcement will take that position of making sure that those streets are cleared or expired parking and so forth. So I would assume that would happen.
Through your worship, that's correct, Councillor Chisholm.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Chisholm. Councillor Dudek.
Thank you. Through you, your worship. First of all, Paul, thank you for a very well-written report. As usual, you're extremely concise and full of information, especially when you itemize concerns that were indicated and provided a response. It made it very helpful for people reviewing the report to see where it's been addressed and what some of the situations were possibly preventing any kind of action forthcoming, especially as Councillor Chisholm raised with the storage of the garbage in the contained unit, having it face towards Rebecca. And I appreciate, as you indicated in your report, that access off Rebecca and Kerr was not possible. And of course, you've got a park beside it. So the only source of egress in that would be out onto Wilson Street, similar to what exists today. So wanted to thank you for that. With the addition of this restaurant that is now going to be on Kerr Street, how are the tenants in that particular portion of the building going to have deliveries made? The reason I ask is with the fire hall across the way and with the delineation on the pavement not to block for fire vehicles to come in and out of the station at needed, is there going to be provision within the building for them to have their deliveries, or is it from the curbs?
Through your worship to Councillor Dudek, my understanding is that the owner is considering a third-party tenant for the restaurant. It may be run by Amica or it may be a third-party tenant, but in any event, there is loading facilities proposed as part of this building, and that's off Wilson Street. So those facilities, they would be available for the building proper.
Okay, I just was worried in regards to that. The other thing is, and I can appreciate, we have constituents directly across from the facility who had expressed concerns regarding safety for pedestrian access. We only have sidewalks on one side of Wilson currently. Would there be an opportunity, and it wouldn't be your department, it would be another town department, if Councillor Chisholm and I were to request a report to have an assessment of the pedestrian access in the area, namely possibly having sidewalks on the other side of Wilson to enable people to get to the park and across safely without having to always cross for pedestrian access. Is that something that you took into consideration when you were going through the report in terms of that safety issue?
Through your worship to Councillor Duddick. So through review of this application, we did review the pedestrian connectivity. And as you may have noted, an additional access was added from the building entrance to Rebecca Street. Of course, for a building like this, accessible at-grade entrances are quite important.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of Wilson Street, I am aware of a number of complaints about speeding on that street. And Wilson Street, while there has been a number of speed surveys conducted over the years, it has been added to the monitoring list for future traffic calming by staff.
Okay, good. And the only other last concern I have, we discussed when we first looked at this application, some sort of clear delineation between Westwood Square and this particular property. How are we going to delineate, and I'm thinking in terms of ownership of either landscaping of things of that nature, given that we're trying to encourage the residents in the building to access Westwood Square and vice versa?
Through your worship, that really flows from the last question, and that pedestrian connectivity. We're trying to include a number of connections to the public park to the north, and also bring that landscaping component from the public park south a little bit down Kerr Street to the restaurant use as well. So that would be private space. It would be maintained and owned by the owner of the site. And through the site plan application, the owner would be responsible for upgrading the streetscape along Kerr Street as well, including new street trees, benches, and so on.
Yeah. And would there be an opportunity, and again, it wouldn't be your department, it would probably be through Commissioner Fu's department. If and when we get to the point where there's a demolition taking place and construction following thereafter, is there an opportunity to communicate to the residents in the immediate area in terms of the construction plan, the truck routes that will be associated with it? I know we went through similar problems with Sharky's where we had to have temporary blocking of a road for trucks having access and things of that nature. So maybe if you could put a bug in someone's ear that we'll be following up, Councillor Chisholm and myself, in regards to that, that would be helpful, because again, they want to know what's going on, and rightly so, in terms of the area. So thank you very much, Mr. Baird.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Robertson.
I know that I'll speak on behalf of Councillor Knoll that we're very happy to see that there is a restaurant that will be open to the public and really serve that main street piece of Kerr. I hope they get a tenant that brings that warmth of all the other restaurants in that area. My question goes to parking with that. Is there immediate parking along Kerr right there? Because I know the fire hall's right across. And if not, are there spots designated within their parking, particularly for that restaurant?
Through your worship, through the site plan application, we will be reviewing the streetscape. That may include additional on-street parking spaces. There are on-street parking spaces at the northern extent of the site and along Westwood Park. Bringing it down towards Rebecca Street is a challenge because of the turning lane and also the fire station. That was an issue that was reviewed as part of the traffic impact assessment, and we looked at the turning radius of the fire trucks coming out there, and there are constraints. Through the site plan application, we'll also be reviewing how the parking on the site is dedicated, so the visitor parking, staff parking, and also the commercial tenant parking. So that will be covered off through the site plan application.
Thank you. That answers my question.
Thank you, Councillor Robertson. Hopefully the restaurant will be worth the walk. I don't know a restaurant in the world where more than 2 or 3 people can park in front. Councillor Hassett-Thiel.
Thank you, Mayor Burton. I note in the staff report that the applicant says they'll work with the operator to put in best practices around the pandemic. I understand that it's not a regulation that we can necessarily enforce, but is there a way to get more specifics on that at some point? Our seniors are entrusted in these facilities, and while they're private facilities, ensuring that we've set a standard that really calls out doing the best they possibly can around ventilation, about being able to secure the spaces. We've been through a heck of a lot and lost a lot of seniors in 2 years, and I felt like there should be more than just a response that says, well, we'll do our best. I trust that this applicant will, but if we could get more particulars, that would be helpful to the community, I think.
Councillor, I'm sure we'll do the best we can on that regard. I will note that that's a provincial matter, and we do have MPPs, and we could bring our interest in having that attention to long-term care and seniors residences continue after COVID, and that might be the best use of that, especially when municipalities don't have that authority. But we do have a voice. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, Council, we have delegations, and Madam Clerk, I'd ask you to call the first delegation.
The first delegation is Gavin Burko.
Gavin Burko, welcome. Council looks forward to your information. Please begin, or unmute yourself and begin.
Oh, good evening. So I will keep my remarks brief tonight, as this is now the third time that I've addressed council on this matter on behalf of numerous residents on Wilson and Head Streets. The theme and tone of my remarks is unchanged from previous occasions on which I've addressed the group in September 2020 and April 2021. Why? Because substantially nothing has changed about this project. The concerns of residents located to the east are unheard and unaddressed. Aside from some very marginal changes that we've heard about, we have not seen meaningful efforts to address our continued concerns here related to the size and density of this development at 230 units, the traffic impact, or the controversial 2 to 3 story split level garbage loading facility that we've all heard about that will be built 12 feet from the property line at the northeast corner of the site. This is the closest area to homes and is abutting Westwood Park. So hopefully you've all had a chance to read the lengthy addendum and staff report on the project, but given that the document was circulated only Friday afternoon, 3 days prior to our discussion this evening, I can assure you that many of my neighbors have not seen it. Many of them are not aware of the report. Many of them are not aware of this meeting. The report is essentially available upon request, and as I speak right now, the addendum is still not available via the town's website dedicated to this development specifically, which notes only that the addendum is to be distributed. So with all due respect, I would like to suggest that it feels like this process is lacking in consultation and transparency. Let's set that aside for a moment. What about the contents of the report? And thank you, Paul, for that detailed presentation. Much of the report is made about compliance with the livable Oakville plan, the urban design guidelines, and streetscape enhancement on Kerr Street, which frankly appears to be a primary focus. And that's to the detriment and disregard of the neighboring residents to the east. Sadly, a few extra planters and guidelines around the aesthetics of the bistro on Kerr Street does nothing for the neighbors' concerns about traffic flow, on-street parking, and road safety. These concessions by the developer, if we want to call them that, does nothing about the odorous garbage facility facing single-family homes, albeit with the door facing Rebecca Street, as we've now just heard, and nearly reaching to the sidewalk, again, within 12 feet of Wilson Street. I've connected with some of you on council and within the planning department, and I'm told, well, there may not be any other options for the garbage facility. There are always other options, even if you may find them unpalatable. Let's start with an obvious one. How about a reduction to the footprint of this supersized development? Would that perhaps allow the developer to set the garbage facility back further at 19 meters in line with the main wall? Is it absolutely essential that the developer place a garbage and loading facility in the area of the site that is literally the worst location with maximal impact on the nearby homes? We just heard from Mr. Barrett that the intention is to maintain the existing landscape strip between the surface parking area and Wilson Street. Why not buffer the garbage facility as well? I am a little disappointed about the lack of critical feedback that this application has generated, and particularly as it relates to this garbage facility, which we've raised repeatedly as a key concern. And I do thank Councillors Chisholm and Dudek for raising it this evening. This council may find the application conforms to livable Oakville. However, for nearby residents to the east, and particularly those directly across from the driveway, including my family of 4, including 2 small children, the result is unlivable Oakville. As you consider this application, the staff report, and the unreasonable conclusion that a 230-unit retirement home fits neatly into the community context next to low-density homes, know that a decision to support it in its current form will drive families out of this community, sadly. We continue to implore council to take a critical view of this project and the implications for residents to the east. Please ask questions. Please give feedback. Please send the applicant back to the drawing board to at least move this garbage facility. Please consider how a 5 times increase in site traffic on a 2-lane unmarked street with a single sidewalk will impact road and pedestrian safety. There are issues that are more pressing than any streetscape enhancement, and it's these topics that will decide the outcome between livable Oakville and unlivable Oakville. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Virgo. Questions? Thank you, Council. Madam Clerk, would you call the next delegation?
The next delegation is Catherine Roscher from MHBC Planning.
Ms. Roscher, welcome. Council looks forward to your information. Please unmute and begin.
Good evening, Your Worship and members of council. My name is Catherine Archer. I am a senior planner with MHBC, and I'm here with Oz Kamal, the partner at MHBC as well. We're here on behalf of our clients, the owners of the property, Spruce Partners and Amico Properties, Inc. We've had a chance to review the staff report, and we are in support of staff's recommendation. I would also like, if it would be possible, to have Oz Kamal be brought up as an applicant, but while we are presenter, but while we do that, I can address some of the comments that have been provided tonight, namely from Councillor Hassett-Beale related to your COVID concerns. It was noted that we will be undertaking best practices learned through the pandemic into the design of the building, but some of those best practices would be things like motion lights, limiting touch points, hands-free operations of doors and other operations, enhanced air filtration in the building, and vestibules and airlocks at the front entrances. And those are some of the things that would likely be included with the building design. I hope that's satisfactory. I'm not
Good
sure,
evening.
Oz,
Yeah, hi. Everyone can hear me? Good evening, Your Worship, members of council. Oz Kamal here with MHBC Planning. I'm a partner here. Catherine and I are here in support of Mr. Barrett and staff report. We've worked considerably with staff on the rezoning component of this application, understanding that there is still a whole site plan component to continue with. So we are looking forward to hopefully having this item moved in approval, and we are here to help support Mr. Barrett in answering any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for taking the time to join us tonight. Council, do you have any questions? Seeing none. Council, it's time to make a decision. Who has a decision to offer? Councillor Dudek. Councillor Dudek.
Your worship, I'd be pleased to move the recommendation. And it is not without regret that we couldn't meet all the concerns of the immediate neighborhood. We have worked with the applicant, as has staff, and the fact that they've now addressed the beepers, they've addressed the time of deliveries, which quite honestly, in other areas that Councillor Chisholm and I represent, we've had complaints about 5 a.m. drop off, delivery of bins, and the fact that this is going to be self-contained, facing away from them. I think we've done as best we can in terms of addressing the constraints of the property itself, namely Kerr and Rebecca not being a point of entry to the property. By no stretch of the imagination are we finished on this. We will be working with the residents in the area, specifically those immediately impacted, regarding some of the concerns they have with pedestrian safety, the truck routes, the traffic, all those things that are associated with the normal redevelopment of a property. I think in the big scheme of things, while they may not want to hear this, given a senior facility as opposed to some other type of condominium use where you'd have a high increase of vehicle access coming and going, I think welcoming a seniors facility into the area is yet another good piece to a fulsome community. I know we have seniors up the road at 271 Kerr who love the area, and I dare say people moving into this will have a similar experience to those at the Kensington as well. So I thank staff for their work with the applicant to have them address some of the issues that made the application not being recommended by staff, but we're now in a stage where we can. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dudek. Councillor Chisholm.
Thank you, Worship. This is a very difficult decision with respect to this transition, especially on Kerr Street. And I guess I look at it this way, we're going to have more challenges up Kerr Street because the transition between residential and commercial up the Kerr Street corridor. And it is very difficult when you have not too much of a buffer or a separation between residential and commercial. I would echo Councillor Dudek's comments with respect to having a seniors residence there would be probably the best appropriate, and in my mind, the best facility that we could accommodate in that corner lot. With that, like anything, there has to be some type of compromise with respect to the development. I believe the accountability and responsibility of the developer has met with a lot of changes to this site, with the tiering back and setbacks and so forth to accommodate the issues of angles and sight lines and so forth on Wilson Street. No doubt, it's going to be a challenge when you have these type of infill facilities coming into the area. Knowing 4 stories and bonusing, not necessarily as of right will happen on the Kerr Street with respect to the planning that we have for the growth area of Kerr Street. So yes, I'm quite pleased with the report that Mr. Barrett's put forward and the work that they've done on this. And so I will be supporting the recommendations of staff. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Chisholm. The matter is moved appropriately by Councillor Dudek and is before you now. Is there any objection to the motion by Councillor Dudek? Madam Clerk, I see no objection, and so that is carried unanimously. Now, Council, at item 7.2 is a notice of intention to designate, and this is the GS Woodhouse at 2487 Old Bronny Road, David Addington, our Heritage Planner, is available if you have questions. Seems to me to be a pretty straightforward file, but I'm always willing to be surprised. Councillor Grant.
As you note, it's a very straightforward file, and I think we should just move it. Thank you.
Thank you. The matter is moved by Councillor Grant for approval. Is there any discussion or objection? Madam Clerk, there being no objection, Councillor Grant's motion carries. Council, the next is your update on timber barns in Oakville, which was requested by a member who couldn't be here tonight. And the motion is to receive the information, and I'm sure the member has read it. If you desire a presentation, Susan Chappert is available for questions. Councillor Duddock.
Thank you. No, I don't have questions per se. The one thing that we raised in committee, the Oakville Heritage Committee, was the opportunity for enhanced surveillance of the vacant barns. And I don't know if that's something that our legal department can maybe work with Heritage. I think they pretty well indicated their hands were tied, but I know we've had problems in the past where a vacant property suddenly has a situation occur and a barn that was to be conserved is no longer there. So we did have a lengthy discussion at the committee and appreciate the fact staff provided this as a result to council's request.
Thank you, Councillor. Can I take that as a motion to receive? Thank you. Councillor Adams, your turn.
My apologies. Did I understand that staff have a presentation that they could share with us?
My notes are that Ms. Chappert is available for questions. I wasn't aware of a presentation.
Oh, then that's fine. Thanks.
All right. Is there an objection to Councillor Duddock's motion? There being none, that's carried. Thank you. We have no confidential discussion items, but you do have your advisory committee minutes. There's an approval, or two approvals. Actually, three approvals. Anyway, I'm looking to you, Council, for a motion. Councillor Giddings is moving the recommendations in 9.1, and I don't know why it's 9.1 and 4.1 and 4.2, but that's what I've got. So that's what you're moving. Any objection? There being none, that's successfully moved and carried. How about now, would one of you give us a motion to rise and report to council? Councillor Chisholm, thank you very much for that. Any objection? There being none, that carries. I rise and report the Committee of the Whole has met and made recommendations on consent items 4.1 and 4.2, public hearing items 6.1, 6.2, and 6.3, discussions items 7.1, 7.2, and 7.3, and advisory committee minutes as noted by the clerk. Could we have a mover and seconder for the report? Councillor Elgar, are you moving the report? Thank you. Councillor Lischina, thank you for seconding. Is there any objection? I'm going to assume, Councillor Elgar, that your hand is up because you're voting for it. Unless you
Mayor Burton, I'm just going to say the report for the timber barns was me. So I just want to make sure you know I am here tonight.
Oh, thank you. I'm sorry. I've heard ardent representations about the danger of losing barns to unexpected fires from another member of council as well as you. So thank you for that. Is there any objection to the report? There being none, the report is carried. That brings us to new business of an emergency, condolence, and congratulatory nature. Councillor Duddock, you are recognized.
Thank you, Your Worship. I wonder through you to Councillor Lischina, given the situation in the Ukraine, if there's any other updates or information she may want to share with the community regarding drop-off areas or other things. I know several of us have been contacted by residents very keen to support the cause in Ukraine. So I just wondered if there might be something you want to share.
Thank you, Councillor Dedek. Yes, a number of residents have reached out, and I appreciate you copying me on those emails. I do want to let everybody know. So first of all, thank you so much for everyone thinking about all the innocent lives that have perished and those who are fleeing a war zone. It's really important to remember that there's a number of organizations that have been doing this type of work for many years, and they have a lot more experience than I do or others locally. But one of the organizations that really does a lot of work is the Canada-Ukraine Foundation. So it's cufoundation.ca, and they're currently have an appeal for humanitarian aid. And it really is the best way to help. Right now, collecting clothes and other things, there's just no way to be able to take it over. That might be later on. I know that they've just been storing them in warehouses. The best way is really through monetary donations, where again, those items that are needed, like hospital supplies and those kind of things, actually do get bought in Poland, most likely, and then don't have a very far way to go to get to where they need to, versus actually trying to get a plane to take items across. So if anybody is still interested, the best way is to donate through Canada-Ukraine Foundation. There's also the Red Cross, Ukraine Humanitarian Appeal, and a couple others, but as I said, cufoundation.ca. So thank you so much for that opportunity to let people know.
Thank you very much, Councillor Lischina. That's a very good point about the distribution bottleneck. So that's a good point to have made. If there's no one else, would two of you give us the motion to consider and read the bylaws? Councillor Longo and Councillor Grant, thank you. This is the approval for the bylaws as listed in the agenda. Any objection? There being none, the bylaws are carried, and that ends the work of this meeting. It's been terrific working with you. Thanks very much for the time you took to prepare and the contributions that you brought to the meeting. And I hope to see you all next time.